Rouge, je t'aime. Red, I love you. Draped in threaded pomegranates, dyed by my archetype. Paired with that which seems it ripe. Needled like unshaded spruce. White like goose. Reddish orange of earth's dotted eyes. Lips and ears on frigid days. All as natural as clays. As me. Wow, so me. Yippee.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Solaceney. Aaron, I thought we were about to get the first ever French poem.
Yeah, we were talking about doing a French episode, but I feel like even the poem is a little bit the bridge too far, apparently.
Yeah, I think so. But this is the third episode in our fashion semester on the Solaceney podcast, where we talk about a beautiful, sustainable, tactile future. And this semester, we're talking about how fashion will play into creating, maintaining, ushering in a beautiful future that is good for the planet and people. And today we're going to be answering questions about self-esteem, identity, and color. And of course, the long-awaited why not wear white after Labor Day. That'll be about a 1-minute segment.
Labor Day is tomorrow, as of time of recording.
Yeah, it'll come out on Labor Day.
This episode comes out on Labor Day.
Oh my goodness.
That's what we should call the episode.
Maybe we should.
Even though you had the funny idea of the pun.
Yeah, I wanted to call the episode something like...
Is individuality dying?
Yeah.
Even though that's a little bit clickbaity because the episode isn't about is individuality dying, but it's kind of like, is individuality equal to dyeing one's clothes?
Yeah.
Really, really clever there. I've used that pun twice in poems so far for Solaceney, but I'm going to say it was clever by you anyway, even though you're just copying me.
Thanks. So tell me about the poem.
This is a bit of a love letter to Red. I wrote it late at night. I didn't reread it until just now when I was reading it out loud. Okay. And it's a lot worse and more nonsensical than I thought, so I won't go into much of an explanation there. Red, my favorite color, historically my favorite color to wear, and that leads us into an early example of this week's Garment of the Week. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That's the jingle that I just came up with.
I don't hate it, unfortunately.
Yeah, every episode on Solaceney for the fashion semester, we're doing a Garment of the Week. And do you want to guess what today's is that I've chose?
I'm going to take a wild guess and say Sweet Red.
Sweet Red is correct. Unfortunately, this week I don't have it to show you. You know what it looks like. I'll put an image on the screen for those watching on YouTube. Solaceney podcast on YouTube. So Sweet Red, the name of this sweater, fleece, jumper, depending on which side of the pond you live on, was stolen from my old roommate's nickname for his futon. It wasn't even a nickname. It was just how he described it once. He said, I also have a sweet red futon.
Yeah.
And so afterwards, we just called it Sweet Red. And then it just pivoted into, I got a red jumper, and we called that also Sweet Red. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll let you describe it a little bit for the audience.
Yeah, so it's an LL Bean jumper with 3 buttons. So like it's not a quarter zip, it's a quarter
button, yeah.
Button. And it had blue trim on the inside.
So detailed. Navy trim.
Yeah, it had blue trim, plastic buttons, a pouch pocket in the front, and it was like a 3XL or something.
Yeah, that was the defining trait. Yeah. It was absolutely massive.
Yeah.
It was massive. And I'm a Marge.
And it also came from an infamous thrift store in my hometown.
Yeah, it was just in like this weird warehouse.
Yeah.
And the floor was uneven, and it was dark. And the clothes there were always interesting.
They were, and it cost like $3.
Correct. So Sweet Red, basically, not to bore the people anymore, it was just this giant jumper that I used to have and wear all the time. I wore it so much that it developed a kind of scent. Mm-hmm. Let's just leave that. That might be a little bit TMI. But it was kind of your prototypical, like, cozy garment. I think most people have a hoodie or sweatpants that's like, you wear this when you're in goblin mode. Shout out. See, I'm up to date with the slang. And you're just like chilling at home, Netflixing during exam season, maybe if you're a student. The difference is I wore it all the time.
Yeah.
I wore it every day. It was almost like a kid when you hear those stories about like, oh, he was a turtle for Halloween, but he wore it every day.
Yeah.
That was like me with Sweet Red.
Well, it was just so versatile. You could wear it in the rain, snow,
you shouldn't.
Sun.
But I did.
Yeah. And if I was ever lucky when I was sick, you'd let me wear it. Because I could tuck my knees into it.
Right.
And just
it was that big. But here's what I want to talk about with Sweet Red. Because today we're talking about identity, right? Mm-hmm. This garment, it almost became like Venom in Spider-Man,
Yeah.
the symbiote, and he gets the black suit,
Mm-hmm.
and it like changes him a little bit, but also he kind of morphs into it. It was like as I grew to honor this and to feel it, it shrunk to fit me a little bit.
It stopped looking so big.
It stopped looking so big.
Yeah.
I mean, this might just be a factor of someone growing, but also I just think there was something symbiotic with this. And I mean, you used to have a jumper like this as well in the similar epoch in university. We called it the roots sweater.
Mm-hmm.
You just for some reason wore every single day, this gray thing.
Yeah.
Everyone goes through these phases.
I think so.
So it's kind of pertinent to the question of what I have written down, putting the cart before the horse. I guess it's about which came first, the chicken or the egg. Do your clothes shape you, or do you shape your clothes? Or in the poem I said, as me, wow, so me, yippee. Because I feel like when you see clothes sometimes in a store, the cliche saying is like, oh, it's so me, or it's so you. But it's like, does that mean this garment reflects who I am? Or does it mean this garment can tell me something about myself or can shape me? Or is there even a functional difference between those two things? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my kicking off this question today.
I think it's a good place to start. I was so fascinated the first time I learned about the fact that ready-made garments is a new industry that for a lot of modern history, I'll say like post-industrial revolution even, clothes were made to order, or like you would buy the patterns and the fabric, or at a fashion show, even now when you go, it's not like there's 100 of these dresses that you see on the runway backstage ready to be worn. Like ready-wear is an industry in itself, and that has brought with it a kind of weird lack of identity, I think.
Okay.
Because before this was so common, your clothes would be made for your body, but now there's a kind of stock 6 sizes, you could say, like extra small to 2XL.
Right. Yeah, even with sizing. Okay, that's true.
And so like you put it on and like sometimes it'll feel right. Like have you ever had that experience when you put something on? I often find it's more when it's vintage than when it's new, and it just like fits perfectly and it feels like it was made for your body. And I feel like that experience is similar to what you're saying with like whoa, it's so me. It's like sometimes clothes just like literally feel like the tactile experience of wearing them like for you. And I feel like it's probably me being hyper spiritual and like about items, but I just think sometimes things really feel that way. And then when you put them on, it brings you back to that first moment of like, whoa, this feels so nice. This fits so well. I feel like myself in this. And a lot of clothes that I wear on a day-to-day basis, I put on and I don't really feel like myself in it. There's probably like 20% of my wardrobe. And I feel like a lot of people have this experience.
Because of the fit.
The fit is like kind of the root.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. The fact that it's actually a really good kind of analogy that we've gone from people knowing their measurements to just fitting in one of the buckets of small, medium, large, or in my case, large, or sometimes medium for some people. It's like you used to know, oh, I actually don't know any numbers like across or what they represent. You took a measurement for me today. What was that about?
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Surprise, but it was 33, if you were wondering. So I think step 1 in avoiding over shopping and overfilling your closet to a point where it's kind of exhausting to get dressed in the morning is finding the measurements or the styles of clothes that you like the best. So maybe you like an oversized jumper or you like a skinny jean, and then just building off of that. But that's very mundane and practical. But the rest of my notes on this are a bit less so. So the first question we asked and how I phrased it was, how do the clothes we wear impact our identity and self-esteem? And the first thing that came to my mind was a story that I heard someone say on a podcast once, and I'm sure it's been repeated many times over throughout the globe. And it was a Sikh man who was telling a story of when he was a kid, he went to the grocery store and like tried to steal a candy bar. And his mom like caught him and was just like, I'll buy it, whatever. And then later on in his day, he went to his mom to apologize. and thought she'd like yell at him and be like, don't steal, you know, like the normal reprimand that you'd get for that. But his mom apparently went on this really somber explanation of like why Sikh people wear turbans and that it is a promise to live up to. And in the early days of the Sikh tradition, people didn't always, like the men didn't always wear turbans, but then one of the early leaders saw a man who was like walking by a river and someone was drowning and like refused to help. And then he said, you'll never be able to do that and like hide your identity again. Like you are going to have to wear this and you will be representing the whole community. And I feel like we don't really have that a lot in most other traditions, but I think it translates to the clothes you wear of like, you're going to wear a Patagonia sweater, so you're expected. And I mean, it's both ways. Like it's you trying to be more outdoorsy, but it also puts out the expectation of, say you're on the side of the road and someone breaks down their bike, they're going to look for the most bike-ish looking person, perhaps to help them.
Yeah, the person wearing spandex.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the clothes we wear are a promise to ourselves and also a promise to the people around us. How do you feel about that?
Well, my notes for this episode are rather scattered, as my garment of the week kind of showed, because it's touching on both identity and color. So my answers for the questions were kind of just both at the same time. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a good time to introduce my soft, crispy dichotomy. Mm. And this is basically my two categories in which all clothes fit. Yep. Soft or crispy. Crispy means formal, soft means informal. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the words mean something because I used to be very, very anti-formal clothing, as you know. And a lot of the reason is because they're uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I remember always going on tirades to you and saying, why would people wear uncomfortable clothes? Doesn't make any sense. Suits are really uncomfortable. Ties are really uncomfortable. Dress shirts are uncomfortable. I find them way too hot to wear. We should just always wear soft and therefore comfortable clothes. And I still agree with all that. Like suits are really uncomfortable, and as are ties, as are dress shirts, and they're all much too hot. Dress shoes especially, but let's not get into that today. But I remember you said, because the goal isn't to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. And that kind of, at the time I thought it was a silly response, but now I think it makes a lot of sense, maybe as I've kind of embraced my masochism a little bit more, in that sometimes you should dress to be as uncomfortable as possible. And the reason for this is a bit of a feedback loop that I guess I'll illustrate with the work from home thing that I think people know intuitively, like everyone wearing sweatpants during quarantine, right? And students and employees alike, because we're often working from home, or it's just like standards kind of dropped. And just to again touch on the chicken or egg question, it's kind of the case that people's mindsets towards work changed because of their environment. And so they dressed to reflect that. But also the dressing reinforced those ideas. And that's why I say it's a feedback loop. Because it's basically the case that the crispier you dress, the crispier you act. The softer you dress, the softer you act. Which is, to bring it full circle, why I eventually got rid of Sweet Red. Because I was like, I don't like what this represents to me, which is kind of vegging. Even though I would do things in it, it had a kind of vegetative aura. Vegetative aura.
Yeah. For sure. As I said, I think the first episode of like people used to just dress up to run errands.
Yeah.
And now you'd never think of putting any effort into your outfit to go to the store. And even going to church, it's like people used to dress up, obviously. But now a lot of like the selling point on like churches' websites is come in your blue jeans. The pastor wears sneakers. And it's like, yeah, like come as you are internally. And like if you don't have a dress shirt, please come. But
it's not about money. It's not about like, oh, you don't have any, you know, designer Italian shirts. You know, you're getting scoffed at. What I like about the Sunday best idea is it's kind of universally scalable. Even if you have nothing, you can comb your hair.
Yeah.
And, you know, wash your shoes or something like that. Brush them off.
Yeah, I remember my dad used to shine his shoes every Sunday morning. Right. And then I'd always want to shine my shoes, but I didn't really have shiny shoes. Yeah.
You're just scrubbing your sneaks.
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was really little, so I probably had like little tiny dress shoes, but it was still, I just remember that very fondly. I think another part of this is, it's like you can set it as a promise or set it as like an expectation for yourself of like, I'm going to wear this uncomfortable outfit so that I'm on, like I'm in that kind of mode. But then another part of it is a way to manipulate your own expectations and manipulate others' expectations of you. And I think this is part of it, of like, even if you're working from home, perhaps try and get dressed and ready for the day, because it will trick your brain into thinking, we're going to
go through the motions. That's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, exactly. And this is another podcast, obviously, I'm listening to, thing that people can do to change how others perceive them. Another religious example is there's this man who, his name is Ram Dass, and he was a psychology professor in America, and then he started studying psychedelics and went to India and had this whole like religious trip basically. But when he moved back to America, he chose to continue dressing as, I mean, he's not a guru, but like to dress in that traditional like beard, white kind of flowy clothes, beads. And he said when you dress like that and you were like walking on the streets of New York, you all of a sudden remove yourself from the sphere, like the dating sphere. You remove yourself from, you set yourself apart, I suppose, in the way you dress. And that was also something we were taught growing up in the church, of like dressing modestly or dressing up on Sunday. You kind of set yourself apart, and like you can use that in a way to promote any desires that you have. So like maybe people want to be perceived as athletic and therefore kind of feel like they have to hold themselves accountable to that. So therefore they wear athletic wear. Or you could say, I'm trying to live a more modest life, a more humble life, and you can kind of change how you dress accordingly. And then the external pressure of people's expectations, which are very greatly shaped by what you wear, I believe, can then be like a good pressure on yourself.
I think so far we've mostly just been describing what is, instead of in the Solacene, what should be.
Yeah.
So my kind of 2 points were about in Solacene individuality or individualism. As you said, individuality is dying, or is it? Is that really what you should focus on in terms of being an individual is how you spend your days, like how you spend your times. And then on the topic of clothes, I kind of thought about it as if you were a screenwriter trying to adapt a novel into a film. So trying to adapt words into images. You can kind of think about it like, how can I adapt activities or events into clothes? So basically dress for what you do.
I think that's a really big part of the Solacene garment industry.
Dress for what you do. That's kind of what I was getting at with the crispy thing. Work versus play. And so when people just wear grey, kind of nondescript, loose sweatpants all day, and, you know, there's a time and a place for these things. But I mean, like, at work, to work, on the red carpet, these kind of things, then probably you are psychologically not giving yourself the structure that you want. And also something that we were talking about recently is that actually wearing crispy clothes, which is ironically always called boring with young people, is itself pretty much undoubtedly anti-establishment right now, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in like academic settings.
Well, yeah, I just think everywhere with young people, it's like that is what would make you more unique, more of an individual. So there's a bit of an irony there, maybe. But also I was thinking about just like narcissism today, where everyone is trying to appear as an individual, like really desperately. That's what most people are trying to do when it comes to dressing, is to set themselves apart. And in the Solacene, I don't think we'll have that kind of, that universal thing where everybody's trying to always work on their personal branding. Because that's what aesthetics are, codified like clothing aesthetics. It's basically trying to appear a certain way. It doesn't matter if you actually read, you know, if you dress dark academia, for instance. So not to get kind of gatekeeping with it, but basically I think in the Solacene, more of the emphasis more commonly will be on finding peace, not through your appearance.
One more tool that I thought of in the Solacene of clothes being like serving is as a conversation starter, in that it's similar to what you're saying, but it's like, what do I want to converse with people about? What do I want to have an easy segue into? So it's like, But I think that's why people wear t-shirts with sayings on them.
Yeah, and band t-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's an easy conversation starter, and I think that will continue as a tool in the Solacene, but perhaps being a bit more cognizant of it, because I think right now people just like collect band t-shirts and it's like, but you've never listened to AC/DC or Nirvana or whatever.
The gatekeeping.
But but I'm just saying,
Name 5
like,
of their songs.
Yeah. But just be intentional with it. Like maybe you want to wear a shirt that's made of leaves, and someone will be like, what's your shirt made out of? And then you can be like, leaves, because I love leaves and nature.
Yeah.
In the Solacene, clothes will be made out of more cool things than just cotton.
Right.
But that's for another day.
2 final points on the self-esteem question. One of them is about clothes in cartoon/fiction. Obviously, I had to talk about it because last week we watched Porco Rosso, which is my favorite film. And Porco, for me, is a style icon. For people who don't know, he's just a pig who flies a seaplane. And he wears this cool brown, like, pilot outfit. And later in the episode, I'll talk a lot about brown. So in fiction, I've talked about on last week, I think, how the outfit defines the character. Like, it is them. Yeah. And especially the fact that in cartoons, they wear the same thing every day. And I think this is kind of a transferable idea for humans in real life, because most of us do the same thing every day. And most of us want to. Mm-hmm. We might not do what we want to every day, but most of us would want to do very, very similar things each day, I think. Most of us like routine, at least 4 or 5 days a week. Maybe not every day of the year, but I think for large stretches of time, we want to be doing the same thing. And so I think having clothes like that would maybe make you feel the same way every day. Make you feel a little bit more like SpongeBob putting on his, like, he goes into the closet and there's just hanger after hanger of the square outfit.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a big part of sustainable fashion and of people who are talking about finding your personal style is finding a uniform. And it doesn't have to be literally like SpongeBob. But for me, it's usually just, I mean, this is very basic, but I have probably 5 pairs of jeans and 5 white shirts. And you just kind of mix and match them. And it's easy. And you know you'll always feel good in it. And it's good to then, if you enjoy shopping like I do, you can look for different kind of variations on that silhouette or on those color combinations.
Yeah.
What do you think your uniform is or would be?
Oh, that's going to be a question for next week.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't do that off the cuff. And then my final point about this is about the body, because this is kind of, we've talked a lot about the internal self-esteem, that which comes from the clothes, but there's also a pretty important thing between those, which is your skin, your shape, mm-hmm. your body. So there's this quote from Rick Owens, who's a famous fashion designer, that says, "Working out is modern couture. No outfit is going to make you look or feel as good as having a fit body. Buy less clothing and go to the gym instead." And I mean, we can talk in another episode about this element of fashion, like the body thing. And I'm not saying this quote as in like, this is something that I think 100% or like I'm endorsing mm-hmm. it. I just think it illustrates well the relationship between mental and physical well-being or self-esteem. And another example is from the video game The Sims, right? You control these little sim characters and you have a bunch of different levels that you kind of have to keep healthy for them, because your goal is basically to keep them alive and make them thrive. And so it's like the obvious ones, they need food, they need socialization, they need hygiene, so you need to feed them, take them to parties and give them baths. But also they have a bar that is basically about their environment. And if it gets too run down and too ugly, like let's say you haven't cleaned it enough, you don't have a nice picture on the wall, they hate their clothes or whatever, that also goes down just as much as the others. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of where I was concluding this question about whether self-esteem and the chicken and the egg with clothes and your identity is that the framing of the question is probably incorrect, because it's more about harmony between those elements.
I think so.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think talking about the body and makeup and skincare is a good topic for another week, because I also realized that this week when preparing for both questions, really, that's a big part of the fashion industry and also has a huge environmental and social impact.
The body keeps the score. What does that mean? I don't know. That's a book that you read. Colors. I had 3 colors that I was kind of written down with notes on.
Okay.
Brown, white, black. already mentioned red. Let's talk about the shade of sweet red. Because it always made me feel like Elmo.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't a muted red.
Oh,
this
no.
was you could just see me from miles away. It was
And
kind
then,
of like
yeah.
your way of finding me if I got lost in the shopping in Walmart or something.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have to say my name over the PA. You would just look for me.
Mm-hmm.
That big red thing, usually with his orange backpack.
Yeah, you're very distinct.
Basically, it made me feel a little bit like a Sesame Street character. And also, when we first met, I just had 7 red t-shirts.
Red shoes, even.
Red shoes, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't buy my own clothes then.
Yeah, but you did have a lot of red t-shirts. I feel like that might be a guy thing. I feel like a lot of guys have a lot of red t-shirts in those adolescent years.
Well, that's actually one of my key points for the color question, is that I think it's the first time in the semester that we're encountering the big difference between men's and women's fashion.
It's true.
That we kind of haven't mentioned so far, but yeah, color. It's such a gendered thing.
Mm.
Recently, I was watching a little bit of the Women's World Cup, and it was kind of like, oh, that's cool. They do different football shirts for the men's and women's team.
Mm.
That's weird. France's blue is like a way nicer kind of soft pastel blue rather than the navy blue like from their flag that the men wear.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like that with a lot of the different countries. So I was like, that's so funny.
Yeah.
And also the Barbie movie, right? I thought that when I went there and saw in the cinema just a sea of bright pink, I was like, this is kind of a funny, cool, like cultural thing.
Yeah, it is kind of weird.
A moment. Cultural reset. I'm so up to date with all the terms. And another note on this kind of like gendered color thing is I remember I once had this pair of blue, bright blue, like turquoise, let's say, trousers that I really, really didn't like. So I was wearing them one day and there were these 2 girls who were kind of like, nice pants. And we were stopping at the stoplight or the traffic light and I was like, thanks. But I always think they were mocking me. So that's always on my mind.
Still to this day.
Yeah, still burns.
Maybe that's why, because the other day we were walking, you had blue pants on, you're like, there's something off. So maybe it's some kind of like trauma that with blue pants.
Do I have any? Did I say that there's something off?
Yeah, you're like, there's something off with me wearing these blue pants. So it makes you feel like you're in the hospital.
Oh, right, yeah, my hospital pants. Garment of the week for next week. Do you think, does everybody nickname their clothes like this? This is a question for the listeners. You can email us or comment on YouTube if you have any like nicknames for clothes in your own closet.
Because you and I have
like
most
dozens.
Camp pants I'm wearing right now.
Yeah, the camp pants.
They just all have names.
Yeah. A lot of them are just like descriptors though.
It's true.
Like blue shirt.
Mm-hmm.
But then a lot of them, hospital pants.
Yeah. Oh my days.
So that's about men's versus women's colors. Obviously there's a lot more to talk about next week, but it's always frustrating to me when I go to the thrift store and the men's, it's like, wow, they're really going crazy. There's some gray pants in with the brown and in with the black and very dark blue. So the other color was brown, which is kind of like my crisp color. If red is like my soft color, brown is my crisp color. And it's hard to find brown clothes, which is very annoying. Mm-hmm. I tried to find a brown suit so that we could get married in it, or I could wear that, and there wasn't any. Yeah. Which is just annoying. But it kind of shows, I guess, the box that men's clothes is usually very, very narrow box.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, until the 1800s, the only color we really had, I mean, there was lots of colors, but the biggest variation was brown. So I feel like in the last 150 years, now that we have actual colors, the men's fashion industry is probably like anything but brown.
That's what I find annoying, though.
Yeah.
Because it isn't. It's just black and gray. It's not even anything but brown. Brown, let me just describe brown a little bit. Brown clothes, it makes you feel like a tree or like a professor or like an archaeologist or something like that. And white, that's another color. I mean, this is kind of a hard section to talk about in Solacene terms, in terms of people will wear this color because it's like people have different preferences and stuff, and there's a lot of different people. But one thing I can say with some certainty is that in the Solacene, instead of white being the norm, your basic white t-shirt, go to H&M, just pick up white t-shirts. They've got a bunch of different types. The natural color will be the norm.
Oh my goodness.
So shocking to me that it isn't. Remember I said to you last week, this is probably not a good sign because I'm ostensibly on a fashion podcast for these next few months to give some level of expertise. When I was like, denim, Is that just naturally dark blue?
That did send me on a tangent. I have 2 pages of notes on indigo.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, like, we don't know what colors things are. People just assume cotton's white.
But it's shocking to me, and here's kind of my point. It's much harder and more expensive to find an undyed t-shirt.
I know.
Which is why I was always, wait, so that everything white is just bleached like that.
Mm-hmm.
None of it, that's the natural color. And that's pretty much true.
That is true.
The natural color is it's a nicer, in my opinion, more kind of brownish off-white, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's more universally complementary to skin tones, and it's not going to get stained as easily because it's like, if you get a little bit of coffee on it, it'll just kind of blend in. But if you get coffee on your white t-shirt,
yeah. Well,
adios.
I think I like white clothes as well. It's probably one of my favorite colors of clothes.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it's frankly bizarre that is just nowhere to be found. Like even in your cheap stores, like you go to Walmart for a t-shirt or something, there's no undyed stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird.
It is weird.
And then black.
Do you like black?
No, I don't like black clothes, but I'm squeezed into it because I'm a man. That's the thing. I don't mean by social pressures. I mean by literally the clothes you can find and buy. My only note on this is that not all black clothes are equal.
It's true.
Right? There's bluish blacks, brownish blacks, greenish blacks. And so I think in the Solacene, if we had more of an attuned eye towards those kind of things, because I think, like, something I also have written down is looking like a jigsaw puzzle. Do you want to describe what that means? Where that famous quote came from?
I mean, you really like monochrome outfits.
Yeah, I think it looks cool.
And it also has to be monotone in that. I mean, I've heard very suitful people being like, never wear black together because it's really hard to discern the blues and the green undertones. Exactly. And I agree with that. The other day, because our apartment's kind of dark, where our wardrobe is, and I put on an outfit that I went outside and I was mortified because my blazer was very blue compared to my pants. But anyway, looking like a jigsaw puzzle is looking like the clothes come from all over the place. Like not necessarily just brands, but also just textures and everything like that.
Right.
Colors more than anything.
Crucially.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool when people wear all one color.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. But that's a personal preference, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do with black. But if we kind of like in modern art, when you stare at the all black painting and you can start to see the variation in the hues and the lighting and the, even the application of paint in different areas, I think that would be a nice kind of attention to detail to foster in the Solacene.
Yeah, I think so. I'm also always so impressed with like maximalist dressers who look like a jigsaw, but you look at them and you're like, yeah, that's an outfit. Because they have an eye tuned for complementary colors, shades, and cuts and everything. And I think people who in the Solacene are into fashion the way that I am today it'll be more of an art than a shopping. Like it'll be more about the
composition.
Yeah, than the buying and accruing of more clothes. Yeah.
Maybe a question for next week also could be our style icons.
Ooh,
or like
I think that's really fun.
Like a Solacene Rushmore or something like that.
I like that.
Of the principles you can draw from them. So my other points on color is about color theory, because as a writer, this is always kind of jammed down your throat about red should mean this, white should mean this. Well, in ancient China, pink means this. And I think there's a time and place for that, but I also often think I'm all for symbolism and metaphor, but it's a little bit redundant when most of your readership won't know what those things mean.
It's true.
So sometimes you'll note that art will kind of create its own color theory, like in a way that the Great Gatsby, right? Like that's a really obvious example with yellow. You wrote an essay on that once.
Probably.
I think you did.
Yeah.
But the ways that book uses yellow isn't like something you'll find on the internet as in yellow means this. It kind of defines it within its own lexicon. Or even like the David Lynch movie Lost Highway. There's that kind of yellowish orange glow, right? That he uses throughout the movies do it quite often, that they use throughout the movie to represent certain things. And so I think to bring it back to clothes, we, meaning society, have kind of come up with our own color theory in a fun way that doesn't match what you'll find on a website about mythology and symbolism from different cultures, but it's just like a modern thing. So in the Solacene, maybe we can kind of play with that a bit. I don't know. And I also think the topic of trending colors kind of goes along with this. Is just such a weird thing where it's like one year this color's cool. And then the next year, actually, this one's eco, should I say, and that one's really lame, or chuggy. I remember when we went into Simon's pretty much every time over the last 12 months, which is a big clothing like department store in Montreal, you would just be struck by the massive amounts of like pale pea green. I think pea green is the name for it.
Mm-hmm.
And also kind of pale purple, lilac in the women's section, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was like, where do these colors come from? It's so interesting about the question of whether it's an organic thing that people want or it's just kind of fed to them.
Yeah. I mean, the people who, like the trend predictors, like there's a huge economy surrounding trend prediction. And I think it's a very questionable amount of, are they actually predicting the trends or are they feeding?
They're making them.
Feeding you.
It's
I think
like,
it's very much
like kind of social engineering.
Yeah.
Because thinking about the purple, that was like an album cover, right? Olivia Rodrigo.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And you could say that maybe she was just ahead of the times, or maybe it was already a thing and she just kind of made it more of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny the kind of like meta-textual ways in which these colors kind of come about as well. Because also you could talk about the generation thing and people would say, these colors are very 70s. These colors are very 90s. And the way that we kind of associate those.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by kind of forming our own color theory. I guess it's not really a Solacene though. It's just like a observation I made.
Yeah. I used to be very anti, like, you wear black to a funeral, you wear white at a wedding, you wear red for Christmas. I was really against, like, there being colors for seasons. But as I've matured as a person, I guess, as an artist, you could say.
Were you going to say as a dresser?
I was going to say as an artist, but I don't feel.
Yeah, it's a little bit pretentious.
It's a little pretentious, but as a person.
As a podcaster.
As a podcaster.
As a Solacite.
Yeah. I have come to realize that those colors just like, they kind of are there for a reason. Like, if you went to a Christmas event wearing hot pink, like, I feel like for the most part, it's not a social thing. It's just like, it doesn't really fit the seasons. There's no, like, the reason that red and green are because of the berries and the trees that are still vibrant. Like, you really have to have a relationship to your surroundings. You talked about this last week of, like, letting your environment inform what you wear. Yeah,
that's something I was going to get with the cartoons as well. Just like tennis. The cool thing about cartoons is that the designer, or in this case the illustrator, can match the background to the clothes.
Yeah. But I think it's that there's a niceness to that, you could say.
Is individuality dying?
Do you want to hear all my things about dyes?
Sure.
Okay, this is going to be my most podcasty expose ever, so buckle up, folks. So dyes have been around basically as long as humans. We've been using berries and natural things to color ourselves, our skin, to color in paintings, and of course to cover the clothes we wear. Dyes, especially natural dyes, well, I'll get into that, but natural dyes fade really quickly, so it's hard when an archaeologist finds a piece of cloth that's 6,000 years old to have any pigment left on it. So there's not a ton of proof beyond about 2600 BC of dyes being around, but there are old cave paintings that are about 16,000 or more years, like BC, and they have pigments. So you gotta assume people were putting them on themselves.
There was some cavemen sweet red.
Yeah, there was some cavemen sweet red. But really, until the 1800s, dyes were really fleeting because when you dye something with a natural pigment, so say you're using just leaves, you need a mordant, which is usually an alkaline or a chemical or a mineral that you soak in water and then soak the clothing in, and then you dye it, and it kind of adheres the color to the clothes.
Yeah.
Because as you know, when you just use berries and dip the clothes in, one wash and it's pretty much gone, or it just leaves a little residue.
Right, my experiment.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the thumbnail actually for this week's YouTube video.
Yeah.
I tried to dye a white t-shirt with choke cherries, which was a really fun experience, and I was really proud of it at the start when it was quite a vivid shade of like purplish, reddish pink. But then, no mordant, and it all went away. Yeah,
but I find it, okay, this is just so cool, like how a lot of different plants, it's not the color that dyes the clothes, it's the chemicals in the plant matter. So it's like if you use stinging nettles, which are just green, to dye clothes, the clothes come out gray. And if you use indigo plants, which are just green, but you have to break it down, there's 2 or 3 chemical reactions that happen when you break them down and you let them ferment, which is really cool. And then it becomes the blue we know.
Avocado also.
Avocado turns things pink. Like, avocados aren't pink.
This
Why
is
do
a
they turn things pink?
very Solacene activity.
It is.
We should do that at some point.
We should.
Like a YouTube video about it. Obviously, we live in the middle of a city, so it'll be hard to
forage.
Go forage some indigo plants, but
we'll see what we can do. Yeah. And yeah, I just think it's so neat. I love natural dyes and I love the history of them, and that there's quite a big resurgence, I would say, of people natural dyeing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we should maybe do a video or something about that, because that'd be really cool. And what I was mind blown about is that there was one known synthetic dye that existed around 2600 BC, and that just made my brain explode, because whenever you learn about fashion history, they say the first synthetic dye was in the 1860s.
Yeah.
So that's a huge gap, but it was discovered in the Egyptian Empire, and it was called Egyptian blue, and yeah, it was chemically synthesized blue, and it just so vibrant and so gorgeous, and it was like shipped all over the place. But then at the fall of the Roman Empire, the craft was lost, and after about the 7th century, it just stopped. So there was a big gap there where there was no synthetic dyes. But then in the 18th century, Mr. Scheele was a chemist who, weirdly enough, got his fortune off of arsenic. He discovered this arsenal green, and it was called Scheele's green. And this is the first kind of synthesized dye in modern times. And you know what arsenic is?
It's some kind of food, isn't it?
Oh, no.
I'm joking.
Arsenic is a poison.
Yeah.
And it was actually known to be a poison. It wasn't just like, oh, whoops, and then they found out. Like, they knew that it killed rats, and it was a good way to, like, off your husband if you needed to or whatever.
Okay.
But they didn't realize that putting arsenic in clothes, kids' toys, wallpapers would have any issue. But it did. It did, yeah. So he was putting it in wallpapers, especially at first. People would wear it, and arsenic is toxic if you inhale it. So, like, it can be vaporized, if it can be absorbed through the skin, and if you ingest it. So it was just the pictures of these dresses. Some of them still exist in these, like, toxic chambers of, like, museums and stuff. Like, you obviously can't go into the room. But it's like if they get damp or whatever, and there's, like, a little bit of precipitation of the dress, like, you would just be poisoned. So, like, hundreds of people were dying from this, and it was in Britain, and, like, the authorities knew. Like, it wasn't a question of, like, oh, this is, like, weird that all these people are dying.
Right.
There were these 2 sisters that died, and they both, like, turned green, and their eye whites turned green. Like, they were just green. So it's, like, the most apparent thing, and there's a bunch of, like, comics and stuff being like, people are sacrificing their lives and their health to look beautiful and wear these bright colors, because Scheele's green, and then a few years later Paris green, these are the 2, like, most famous ones. They are vibrant, and people up until then really hadn't worn a lot of vibrant clothing. And then it just, like, wasn't outlawed for a very, very long time because it was so profitable. And it's like, you look back at that and you're like, this is kind of absurd. Why wasn't it outlawed? Or why didn't just people from the ground up say, let's not? Maybe let's not. And eventually some companies, kind of in the manner of, like, the sustainable fashion movement, started using it as a selling point, putting on their posters like, no arsenic in our wallpaper, and so on. And I mean, it's just years and years and years of these toxic dyes being manufactured. Purple, when that was discovered, can you imagine the rave that caused? Because up until that point, do you know how they got purple dye?
Seashells? Was that?
Yeah, sea snail shells.
Murex, I think is the name for it.
Yeah. So up until then, you'd need thousands and thousands and thousands of sea snail shells crushed up to get purple. So that's why it was associated with royalty and so on. And it's the same with like a really bright red, like that was a cochineal bug.
It's funny because now the really bright, vibrant colors are a dime a dozen, almost literally. But if you wanted something more kind of natural, muted, and maybe an imperfect dye, i.e. done by hand or just with, as you said, like non-synthetic stuff, that's what would cost you a lot more. What I was saying about the white t-shirts and the undyed t-shirts, kind of.
It's true.
Anyway, the arsenic story was very beautiful, sustainable, and tactile.
But anyway, the arsenic, and then obviously at a certain point, these started to be banned. And a lot of the chemicals, what I was trying to get at with the purple and the pinks, as those were discovered, they just caused absolute raves. Like people were just obsessed with color, but it was killing them, and, like poisoning them. And people would like wear socks that had like pink dye in them, and then just like lose mobility in their feet and stuff. And it was quite tragic. And now in most European and North American countries, all of these types of dyes are banned, as you can imagine. But you would think, given how deadly they are, they would be banned everywhere. They're not. And so in China and in other countries that produce a lot of clothes, Bangladesh, and that's kind of why these North American companies export their production to these places with lower regulations, they still use them. And not necessarily the arsenic dyes, but a Canadian research organization decided to test fast fashion items for levels of lead and PFAs and formaldehyde, just like a bunch of toxins. They're like, let's just see what's in these.
Yeah.
And they found lead in Shein clothes. They found formaldehyde in Shein's kids' clothes, mind you, and a bunch of PFAs, which are these like forever chemicals that don't break down and they just bioaccumulate, and they're like super toxic to the environment and to people. Phthalates in Zaful clothes, like they're just being used. It's like these super toxic dyes, and you would think they're not allowed, and they're toxic to the people that wear them. So it's like I think the lead in the Shein clothes were 9 or 10 times more than is like safe. And so you can imagine this is one piece of clothing that can poison you. The people who are at the factories who are exposed to just bucket loads of this dye, like they're just being poisoned. And I watched a documentary about a river in China that was being polluted. It's just one of hundreds, thousands in the world that are being polluted. And the people are saying like, I assumed the water was fine to like wash my feet in or to like rinse out a cup or whatever. And then this man was saying he spent 10 days where he was like oh, I'll just use the river water or whatever. And then he, just like lost mobility in his legs because he was like washing his feet in this river. That is where the factories are dumping the dyes. And the dyes are pretty much the most toxic part of the process. Like there's lots of other human rights atrocities associated with fast fashion manufacturing, but dyes are just the worst, and they don't break down. Like 90% of the dyes that we use are synthetic, and it's not like if you dumped a bunch of natural dye into a river, which could still harm it and cause it to die because it would feed algae growth and then the ecosystem would die. But like these just stay in the river, and because they're so dark, water can't get down, everything dies, it just becomes toxic. I don't know. Maybe I won't even get into denim today, but do you have any questions?
Let's leave denim.
Yeah.
I like talking about the pig who wore the brown overalls and flew the plane, the seaplane.
Yeah, but I feel like this was important to talk about because it haunts me.
Right. Can we leave the listener on something kind of positive, though? The Solacene colors, right?
Yeah.
We've got the Solacene pink, Solacene beige, Solacene dark green.
Mm-hmm.
What was the thinking behind those?
Well, the beige represents the paper that we use and that we want.
It's kind of an off-white.
Yeah, and we just say like we like things being tactile, so that's kind of the green.
Inspired by Chobani.
Yeah, it is. The green is for nature, and the dark pink purple is for the digital side of things. We think it's a beautiful color, but to me it's kind of, originally I feel like it was to say this kind of contrast between the natural and the digital world that our podcast tries to bridge.
For me, it represents wine.
Oh.
Which I like to drink.
Do you?
No, I don't. Okay, thanks everybody for listening. Buy the zine.